state's attorneys are present. We are outside the presence of the jury. The state has rested its case. The defense moves for a directed verdict. When evaluating a motion for directed verdict, the court is not free to weigh the evidence and thus invade the province of the jury, whose prerogative it is to judge the facts. Rather, the court's role is to determine whether the state has produced believable evidence on each element of the crime from which a jury acting reasonably could convict the defendant. The motion for directed verdict at the close of the state's case may be denied if the trial court finds that the state has established a prima facie case against the defendant, again by producing believable evidence of all elements of the crime charged. The court is required to view the evidence in the light most favorable to the state. If there is any evidence, however slight or circumstantial, which tends to show guilt of the crime charged or any of its degrees, it is the trial court's duty to submit the case to the jury. Applying that liberal standard to the proof that has been offered by the state, the court denies the motion for directed verdict as to both counts charged in the information. Let's have the jury in. Thank you. Please be seated. We are on the record in the matter of State of Utah versus Martin MacNeill. He is present with his counsel. The state's attorneys are present. The jury is seated. You may call your next witness.
Your Honor, just before calling him, if I could have an exhibit marked.
You may.
This is Defendant's Exhibit EE, and we've reached a stipulation with the state for its admission. It's a prescription record showing that on April 10th of 2007, Michelle MacNeill was prescribed oxycodone, prednisolone, and then clomethazine suppositories.
Any objection to that exhibit? It's EE. Defendant's EE is received. You may. Thanks.
Your Honor, we would call Brett Besser.
Mr. Besser, would you come forward here to the clerk's desk? Please raise your right hand and be sworn. Then you may be seated to my left.
You do solemnly swear the testimony you shall give in this case now pending before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you.
Would you state your name for the record?
Brett William Besser.
Thank you. And how are you employed?
I am a industrial hygienist for the Department of Labor, OSHA, with a specialized training and emphasis in ergonomics.
And what education have you received in order to perform your job?
I have a master's degree in public health from the University of Utah, which had an emphasis in safety and ergonomics.
And what is ergonomics?
It's basically the study of people and work and how they interact to either work more effectively or to minimize the chance of injury.
Does it involve lifting?
Yep.
How so?
Well, actually, lifting is one of the things, at least for OSHA, that has been studied the most. Lifting in an occupational setting is probably one of the leading causes of injury. And so we've tried to come up with recommendations as to what will normally cause an injury. That there's been quite a bit of work done over the last 30 years that initially with cadaver spines to determine how much force it takes to basically crush the spine down. And then they've back extrapolated from that to how much you could lift and likely not injure the spine.
And have you received any particular certifications in relation to ergonomics?
Yes, I'm a certified professional ergonomist.
And since when have you been certified?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. 99, 2000, somewhere in there.
And since then, have you continued to have experience in assessing lifting scenarios and capabilities of people?
That's basically been my occupation for the last, well, I started that in 1991 and continue to do it today.
Okay. And were you asked to examine a particular scenario in relation to the Martin MacNeill case?
Yes, the bathroom.
Mm-hmm. And may I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm showing you two exhibits. One is Exhibit 16. Do you recognize that?
Yes, that's the bathroom that we did the test at.
And then also Exhibit 22. Do you recognize that?
Yeah, that's a diagram of the layout of the bathroom.
And that's not your diagram?
No.
Did you do a similar diagram?
I did, and the dimensions, I believe, are in the report that I provided you.
Okay. And so what measurements were significant to you
Well,
in preparing the report?
to determine whether somebody could do something, probably the critical measurements here is the, should I be showing anybody in particular? Okay. The fact that the shower stall is blocking egress into the tub, so basically it would sit up against the far end of the tub so that you can't get directly close to the tub to lift out. The distance of the tub rim and the decorative tile work around the outside keeps you from getting close to the lift. And in lifting, the distance that the farther you reach out, the more damage or potential damage and more difficult the risk is. Not unlike a child on a teeter-totter, where you can have a small child way out on the end of the teeter-totter could lift up an adult who's sitting closer to the fulcrum. The farther that load moves out, the more compressive pressure there is on your discs and vertebrae, and a greater chance you have of injury. So we looked at that distance, which would basically move the load out away from the body, the lack of access on this side, and then the actual makeup of the tub to see how easy it would be to rearrange and move a load within the tub to try to get it closer so that it could be lifted.
And you've used words such as damage and capability. Could you explain what is the relationship between those two descriptive phrases?
we basically look at the, especially with the NIOSH lifting equation and with the Michigan model, what they've looked at, like I explained before, is when you start getting these microfractures or tears, microfractures in the vertebrae and tears in the discs. So your capability is, it really tracks together. The capability of performing the lift is tracks along with the option that you're not going to get injured. So they kind of track together. And of course, there are some things that certain individuals are not capable of doing, like our 65-pound bags of dog food. My wife can't lift out of the car, but I can. So there is a capability based on your particular anthropometry.
Okay. And in relation to the scenario with the bathtub, what conditions or assumptions did you make?
I was shown some pictures of a idea of the bathroom scene, so I had kind of an idea of what the person's position was in the tub, and then we went and we had a surrogate who was about the same size that we placed in the tub to see what kind of access, how easy it would be to slide them over closer to where you could lift. And then the rest of the measurements we took, some of the things that are in there that are hard to, that can't really fit into these models is like the one picture here, it appears like there's water splashed out on the floor, and the tiles were a slick surface. So our models don't really work very well in how slippery a surface could be. The better footing you have, the easier that you can lift. If it's off a slick surface, your feet tend to slide out from you, especially when you have to lean forward to get access. Yeah.
And so did you use an assumption for a body position in the tub?
Yes, I looked at it and assumed that you would be able to slide the body around somewhat closer. As it turns out, the shape of the tub, you really can only move it into really a pretty limited position because the shoulders end up conforming to the tub, and as soon as you let off any pressure, they roll right back into into the deeper part of the tub. So we set up a scenario where I believed you would have to start the lift from, and did our measurements from that point.
May I approach the tub, Your Honor?
You may.
So this is a representative tub. And
Yeah.
may the witness step down?
You may.
This red sticker here, we have agreed represents approximately the condition of the water faucet.
Okay.
Is that consistent with your recollection?
Yeah, they were off to the side.
And so for purposes of your calculations, what body position did you consider the subject, just for purposes of your calculation?
We had her with the shoulders in about this position. As we tried to move her around, this would actually be a better position over here, but the body tends to slide back into this posture here, which is kind of impacted by the shower wall that would be right here. So that's about where we lifted from, and it seemed to be pretty general that she was not laying flat on the bottom of the tub, that we were able to get her up into a fairly sitting position. Although with somebody who's unconscious, it's pretty hard to tell how you'd be able to hold that position. But that's kind of created a best possible scenario, and so we started with that and did those measurements.
And so you just used an assumption from that point of view, obviously not knowing all of the factors of how Michelle MacNeill may have been on April 11th, 2007, right?
Exactly.
And in relation to the assumption that you used, you've indicated that you used some NIOSH lifting standards.
Mhm.
And is that a lifting standard that is generally accepted in your industry?
Yes, that's probably the most widely used tool because it doesn't require any additional software or anything. You can do the calculations yourself, and it does have validation in the workplace where they've been able to see a direct relationship between when the tool says you're going to have an injury, that in a workplace anyway, you also see injuries.
And did you also, you referenced the Michigan?
Michigan 3D static strength prediction model.
Okay. And so in relation to those two, well, is the Michigan standard as well generally accepted in your industry?
Yes, it is. It's a little less useful for us in occupational setting because it really looks at a one-time lift. As if the person were a crane or machine, what could they lift out of the tub or wherever you're trying to lift? And it doesn't take into account frequency, which, I mean, as most of us would know, the more you lift, the more tired you get, and it gets to be harder. So it's a little less used in occupational circles, but it's well respected.
And so in occupational circles, the focus is more on damage control. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, trying to keep a level that people are working at where they won't be hurt.
Whereas the Michigan formula is, as you indicated, just a one-time
Yes,
lift evaluation?
it basically came out of their engineering department and treats the body as if it were a machine, a set of levers and cables, and then they look at, you know, what your elbow or your shoulder or your back is capable of doing, and plug that in and measure all the forces and decide whether you'd be capable of doing it.
And so as you did your site visit and used the assumptions that you did with a body sitting in the tub,
Mm-hmm.
what measurements did you take in order to apply both the NIOSH and the Michigan standards?
We took the dimensions of the scene, and then we hooked up a harness and determined what the force was using a force gauge to actually get somebody moving, lifting them up, and yeah, basically how much it would take to get them lifted.
And so you used a harness to
Yes.
do the lift. Did you take any measurements in relation to the body position of the person potentially doing the lift?
Yes, we did measurements, assumed the body in the tub, and measured how far the person would have to reach with both the left and right hands, how far the distance was from the hands to the critical part in the lower back, and how far, where the hands would be in position, either vertically or horizontally from the load from the person.
And are those measurements critical in order to apply both the NIOSH and the Michigan lifting standards?
Yes, particularly the horizontal distance that the load is away from the back.
And why does that make a difference?
Like I said before, sort of like a nutcracker, you know, you can't crack a nut in your hand unless you're really tough. But if you can put a nut in the end of the jaw there and use the same force, leverage allows you to break the nut. And so the farther that load is away from you, the harder it will be to lift, the more stress it takes, puts a person to, and it's a greater chance of being injured, and there's fewer people that are probably capable of doing the lift.
You indicated that you used a meter to measure force.
Mm-hmm.
And what is the significance of that?
The amount, the person can weigh a certain amount, but the actual force or the weight that you see in your lift is going to be different. I think our assumption was the victim weighed about 180 pounds. What we saw through a number of different measurements was that you would have to lift about 140 pounds to do that particular lift.
Okay. And did you use different scenarios in relation to lifting?
Yeah, we did. We had first the lift, excuse me, we had a first lift that was with our surrogate, fully clothed with the harness on, lifted them up until we got them basically to about mid-sternum, and that was in, well, it's probably in the report, but we did that. It was in the 140, 150 pound range.
Do you have a copy of your report?
Not up here.
May I approach on it?
May.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so our first lift, we had readings of 147 pounds, 149 pounds, and 146 pounds. Then we had the surrogate put on a swimsuit. Randy filled the tub of water to a level, it seemed to me to be about a third. We put the harness back on, and we got readings of 92, 84, 119, 125, and 117. And then we drained the water out of the tub, still with the surrogate in the swimsuit and with the harness on, and we got readings of 145, 138, and 144.
Okay. And did those readings also factor in to your calculations in relation to both the NIOSH lifting equation and the Michigan 3D?
Yes, both equations come up with, you basically put in the actual weight that you're lifting, and it will give you a factor that in the case of the NIOSH lifting equation, it tells you what they consider to be a safe lift, and then you look at the actual weight lifted divided by the safe lift. And then in the Michigan model, they take the weight that you have and they try to determine what percentage of the population would be capable of doing that.
Okay. And what variables did you consider in relation to the person potentially doing the lifting? For the Michigan model, when they say the population that it's capable of doing it, that population is, in this case, we put in a 51-year-old man, about 6'2" and 206 pounds, because like I said with the dog food example, if you were a linebacker for BYU, you might be able to do something that my wife and the dog food couldn't do. So. And were those assumptions that you used consistent with your understanding of circumstances of Mr. MacNeill on April 11th of 2007?
I guess I don't quite understand.
The 6'2", 206 pound, 51-year-old person, was that roughly the assumptions you were
Yes,
trying
yes.
to?
Yep.
Okay.
Matter of fact, the Michigan model actually has you put in those exact parameters. The NIOSH lifting equation is a little more, it has, its assumption is that this is something that 99% of the male work population could do and 75% of the female work population could do. So it's not quite as robust as far as the group that you that would be capable of doing it, but there's some pretty good recognition that as you start to get to be over 40 years old, you start to lose muscle mass, and the vagaries of life take their toll.
And in relation to the NIOSH lifting equation, what did you conclude after you put the variables into the equation?
That the way the lifting equation works out is you have a lifting index that says this is safe, and that's basically off of occupational studies and scientific literature that says, if it says that 15 pounds is safe and you're actually lifting 15 pounds under these conditions, most people can do this. Then it goes up to, at a level that's about 3 times what that level, that's a level that at that level or above, most of the working population will be injured. And then between 1 and 3, it's an increased risk of injury. I believe we had, there's a little bit of variation there, but we had a lifting index that was between 11.6 and 12.5. So a level of 3, most people would be injured, so this is about 3 or 4 times what you would consider to be the safe level.
And so does the fact that this lifting index was 3 or 4 times what would be considered safe lead to any conclusions, in your opinion, regarding capability?
Yeah, I would say that at those levels, it's highly unlikely that someone would be able to do that. Now, you know, everybody hears about the woman that pulls her car off of her child, and so it's not to say that it's impossible, but it would be quite a lift. And to tell you the truth, when I was doing the lift with the surrogate, with the harness, and in much better situations, I'm not sure that I could have gotten them out. So.
And what about with the Michigan 3D model?
The Michigan 3D model goes in, and what it provides you is a compressive load on the spine, and it gives you a set of graphs that says for the particular body linkages, you know, a person of this particular body size, how many would be able to do that? And from that model, the knees, ankle, and hips all said that it would not be possible to do it, but that was really very hard to line up or to ascertain because with the slick surface and, you know, to make sure that we really didn't know exactly how we would have the postures. But for the shoulders, it said that no percentage of the population would be able to do it, and for the torso, about 7% of the population that was equivalent to Mr. MacNeill's size would be able to do that.
And based upon the Michigan standards, did you draw any conclusions in relation to capability of, under these assumed circumstances of a person doing the lift?
You know, that it would be highly unlikely a typical hospital situation, one of the things they've tried to do is say, well, we'll just assign teams of 2 to lift people rather than to provide lifting assist. And what they, I believe, have looked at, I don't know the whole study, but that people are still at risk because of the postures and positions that people have to work from.
I don't think that's what he said. He said they didn't lessen their load very much. What is the load? It's the amount they have to carry, correct?
Yeah, I think if you go to the next sentence, it explains that.
I want you to read this right here.
Okay. I was surprised that having 2 people work together did not significantly lower their similarity to high-risk jobs. We think that when 2 people are doing the lifting, they may be fighting each other somewhat.
Okay. So that's, I guess, his postulation on why that might be the case.
One of several, I think.
He also recommends that they give them mechanical lifting devices.
Mm-hmm.
You think he's sponsored by these lifting device groups?
I don't know. These universities have a lot of sources of income.
But again, back to what he said when 2 people shared the work of lifting, that didn't lessen the load very much. Are you aware of how many people it took to lift Michelle out of the tub?
No. I heard that there was one other neighbor that helped, but I don't know if there was more than one.
You also cited too, NCCI releases study on safe lifting programs at long-term care facilities. Do you remember this one?
No, not in specifics.
Okay. Can I approach again, Your Honor?
You may.
I didn't want to cut down the tree for this one either.
That's fine.
Does that look like the article you cited to? We can blow this up if you need to.
Oh, that would be helpful.
Move this over.
Okay. Yeah, that looks,
Looks familiar?
yeah.
Okay. And isn't it true that the objective of this research was to assess the implications for workers' compensation costs to save from injury with lifting programs at long-term care facilities?
It probably could have been.
Well, that's what it says, right?
Oh, well, if that's what it says, that's probably
So this
because,
one-
well, injury equates to increased workers' comp, so.
Right. So this one isn't addressing our situation, and this one isn't even addressing manual removal. This one is talking about the use of a safe lift program. Everything they compared in here, all of the homes that they studied in here already had mechanical lifting devices. And here the comparison was workers' compensation costs between the ones that that used a safe lifting program and those that didn't. Correct?
I'd have to read the study again, but I would imagine that they were probably looking at something that would reduce, a program that would reduce the likelihood of injury.
Okay. So again, it's not really talking about our situation here.
Well, except for the fact that when you have, as part of these programs, you evaluate the lifting situations that you're going to be in potentially and evaluate those. And if you start to have if you have situations that you've identified that where you would be injured, then they would go and make changes in those situations to allow people to perform a wide variety of people to perform the task without being injured.
Sure, but we're talking about one task here.
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking about multiple tasks. We're not talking about pre-planned safety precautions.
Right.
Your next one is the NIOSH hazard review. You remember this one?
Not specifically, but
Okay. Approach?
May.
Does this look familiar?
yes.
Is that it? Keep going. You can keep going. It's just,
Yeah, I would imagine.
am I saying that right? They call it NIOSH?
NIOSH, yep.
Okay.
National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health.
Okay. And in this one, they discuss all kinds of things. They discuss injury, they discuss allergy, they discuss pathogens, they discuss occupational stress, even violence, correct? Mm-hmm. And it's to raise awareness and increase understanding of safety and health risks involved in healthcare and prevention strategies.
Right.
Again, it's not talking about the situation we're discussing today.
Not in its entirety. I'm sure it has a section talking about capability of lifting, but no.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the RWL. What does that stand for again?
Recommended weight limit?
Okay. And I have to admit, I'm not an ergonomist, but I've been trying to understand this formula a little bit better.
Okay.
This, and what this stands for. The RWL is to determine a recommended limit on the amount a person should lift, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, in this instance, we have a number of factors that go into this equation, correct? Mm-hmm. And we have a load lifting, we have a horizontal, what does the M stand for?
Multiplier?
Multiplier, we have a vertical multiplier, and I've got this somewhere, I've got to pull this up. And we have a coupling factor, correct? Mm-hmm. What does the coupling factor stand for?
Coupling factor is a recognition that it's less strenuous to lift something that you have a good hold of. Say, if you have handles, it's a fairly minor component. In it with a very bad coupling, you reduce the amount that can be lifted by about 5 or 10%, I believe.
Would it be fair for me to call the coupling factor grappability? The ability to grab and hold on?
Yeah, yep.
Okay. And you used a coupling factor of poor, is that correct?
Right.
And what is the coupling factor? These are assumption-based constants, correct?
No, there is actually, well, are you talking about my assumption or the people who made the tool?
The people who made the tool.
The people who made the tool actually had people lift, and it's actually a psychophysical data that, you know, what you feel comfortable lifting, what you're able to lift. They run multiple trials and determine what what people feel they can lift and are willing to lift.
Okay, so what you've done, and I'm not saying you're right or wrong, I'm saying you've made an assumption as to the grappability of this situation, correct?
Right.
And you've made that assumption as poor, and because of that, you put in a coupling factor for that. Will you look at the equation and show me which one was the coupling factor?
At least in what I've got printed here, I didn't actually add the coupling factor in or gave it a factor of 1, so.
Isn't the 1 your frequency?
It probably is.
So which one's the coupling factor?
So it's probably not in this particular one. I do have the,
You don't know which one of these is your coupling factor.
well, if it goes in line with the way it's listed on the rest of it, it would be not in this formula.
So you missed that.
Well, I missed it in typing it into the report. The question is whether I missed it in the actual calculation.
Do you want to do the calculation right now and see?
No, but I could go and get the actual calculation and,
Is it here?
yeah.
Would you go grab it? With leave of the court.
Is he leaving?
No, he's just going back here.
Okay.
Able to find that?
Yep.
So are you telling me that your figure of the 11.2 is wrong, or you just failed to reflect the coupling factor in your report?
It appears that I neglected to put it into the report. I have 0.9 as the coupling multiplier in here with the final result is 11.18.
And that's how you got to 11.2, you rounded up?
Right.
Okay. And in your computation for a vertical factor, or the VM, you used Michelle's height of 68 inches, correct?
No, probably not. Probably used her height of 68 inches to determine what her seated armpit height would be at.
Can I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Can I show you the report? Mm-hmm. So right here, this is the vertical factor, correct?
Right.
And you said based on Michelle's height of 68
Inches.
inches, he would need to lift her approximately 26 inches to get her hips out of the tub.
Oh, okay, yeah, yep.
So
Yeah.
you used a height of 68 inches in order to compute your vertical factor.
Right.
Okay. And the longer a person is, the more significant that vertical factor is going to be.
Well, I guess it depends on what you're doing with them. But
Okay, so in this situation, let's say 68 inches, according to your calculation,
Right.
you have to get 26 inches, right?
Right,
I have that same person seated in the exact same situation, their legs are coming up here, and they're 7 feet tall. I'm gonna have to pull them up a lot higher, right?
right,
Okay.
right.
Does the, and here you used a frequency of 1 because we're talking about one task,
Right.
correct? Does your RWL take into account a multiplier or a variable for adrenaline?
No.
It does not take
Nope.
that into account.
Nope.
And you said you've heard of situations where a mother on adrenaline lifted tremendous loads in order to save a child or something.
Anecdotally, yes.
You haven't heard of them personally?
I've never actually seen a case description of this happening, but everybody talks about the love of a mother and what they can do, so.
This RWL can be computed in kilograms or in pounds, correct?
Yes,
And you computed it into pounds.
yes,
And so your RWL in this situation was 11.2 pounds.
yes,
And that's to get a lifting index, well, you used that in order to compare with the lifting index, correct?
to compute the lifting index.
Okay, and so if I'm understanding this right, under your computation, you're saying that the safe or the recommended weight limit is 11.2 pounds,
Yes,
okay? and you talk about how we want, in ergonomics, the RWL to be comparable to the lifting index.
Yes.
Because when it starts getting in multiple, like to 3, like you said, a lifting index of 3, that's when injury starts.
Well, no, actually, anything over 1, injury starts. When it gets to 3,
Oh, I apologize.
Injury is almost likely to happen, although that's where this particular model breaks down just a little bit, because that is looking at an occupational lifetime. So.
Right. And you say in your report, going above 3 represents an unacceptable risk of injury. And a lifting index, let me...
Yeah, well, a high risk of injury, yes.
Well, didn't you say unacceptable risk?
I think that I probably said unacceptable risk at the point where you're at 11, a lifting index of 11, not a lifting index of 3. But
Okay, let's see.
I mean, anything's possible.
Will you read this, just this sentence starting with there, right there?
Let's see. Can safely lift a weight with a lifting index of...
No, starting with there. Oh.
Oh, starting here?
I say there and I point there, but I mean THERE.
Oh, now you've really got me confused.
There is also.
Oh, okay. There is also general agreement that most of the workforce will be at an unacceptable increased risk of injury when the lifting index rises above 3. So the calculated
That's
lifting
right there.
index of...
That's all I wanted.
Okay.
So I guess anything's possible. You said unacceptable increased risk when the lifting increase rises above 3.
Yes.
Okay. So for example, if we take 11.2 and we times it by a lifting index of 3, we get 33.6 pounds.
Yes.
And you're saying that 33.6 pounds in this situation creates an unacceptable risk of injury.
Yes, that it greatly increases the risk of injury.
So under these circumstances, a person should use a mechanical device.
Well, if they have it available, it certainly should.
Okay. So let me give you a hypothetical. If a person is in the same situation and they have a 35-pound child unresponsive in the tub, does that create an unacceptable risk of injury to get them out?
I'm going to object to the hypothetical. I think it's an incomplete and inapplicable hypothetical.
Overruled, he may answer.
I don't know that it would be unacceptable, but it would certainly put you at greater risk to lift somebody 33 pounds from that posture, yes.
Well, and you said that it's an unacceptable risk previously, didn't you?
Well, actually, I said that NIOSH considers at 3 times the lift, or that RWL, that they consider to be an unacceptable risk, and that is looking at an occupational situation where you can design a work process.
Okay, so that's, in other words, it's inapplicable to this situation.
It's not designed for this situation, but it's not inapplicable in that it, at a higher risk, you're more likely to have injury or be incapable of doing the task.
But according to your NIOSH citation, your calculation, with this time including the coupling factor, a 51-year-old who is 6 feet 2 inches, 206 pounds, would have an unacceptable risk of injury lifting 33.6 pounds out of this situation.
Well, now, I think the NIOSH said that in a work situation, 3 LI is generally unacceptable. In this situation, I said that at 11.6, so if you took your same thing and you had 186 pounds, that's probably an unacceptable lifting situation.
I want to go back to the thrust of your opinion. In your opinion, you say that you are addressing whether a 51-year-old man with the stature of 6 feet and 2 inches, weighing 205 pounds, could lift his unresponsive spouse from a jetted tub by himself. That's your
Yes.
your task, so to speak,
Right.
correct? Did you compute anything to this same situation with two female adults offering to assist him get her out?
No.
And one of the factors that obviously plays a role in all of this is the patient, right?
Correct.
And in your report, you talk about Michelle being borderline obese, correct?
Right.
And this is based on BMI.
Right.
What is BMI?
Body mass index, basically how much you weigh versus how tall you are.
Okay. And what makes a person obese as it relates to a BMI score?
That they're too heavy for how tall they are.
Okay. Let me ask it this way. What is the score for obesity?
Well, at least the websites I looked at had it at about 30.
Okay, 30 is pretty standard, correct? Isn't it true that body mass index is higher in women than in men?
Yeah, generally.
What? Okay, we're speaking in generalities, right?
Right.
And
All right. It's actually that women, as I understand it, women generally have a higher BMI than men do.
okay, so it's generally higher.
Yeah.
Okay, but you still use the exact same equation to compute BMI, whether you're a man or a woman.
Yes, you do.
Okay, and BMI is highest for women as they approach age 50, correct?
I don't know. I think you could be heavier for your height, no matter what age you're at, but
We're not really talking about possibilities, we're talking about generalities. And you've cited to a number of sources on obesity and obese America and how people are getting fatter and it makes them harder to move around, right? And so generally, a woman's BMI score is highest as she approaches age 50.
yeah, it probably gets higher as she gets older.
Well, and then it goes down once they hit 60, correct?
You know, I don't know.
Well, in other words, higher BMI is, the highest BMI for a woman is, for a person is going to be if it's a woman and if she's 50 years old.
Yeah, I guess there's statistical data that would show that. I don't know.
Okay, I want to
Sure, but-
do some math with you.
Okay.
You computed BMI for Michelle MacNeill, correct?
Yes.
And what metrics did you use for that?
The definitions that are what was given me, that she was 5'6" and 182 pounds.
Okay. Now, we previously talked about vertical factor. We talked about how vertical factor is more significant the taller a person is, right?
Yes.
And in that situation, you used a height of 68 inches, correct?
Yes.
And in the BMI, height is inversely proportional to BMI. Isn't that true?
Yeah, if the weight is continual, if the weight is the same, then the BMI would get less as you get taller.
Right. So the lower the height with the same weight, the higher the BMI.
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, can we have permission to set this
Yeah,
up?
go ahead.
And so, interestingly, when it comes to vertical, the vertical factor, you use 68 inches in height, correct? But when it comes to BMI, you use 66 inches.
Yep, I guess I did.
And both of these kind of support your position, don't they?
In what way?
Well, if you want to have the position that it's harder to pull her out, you want a higher BMI. And you want a higher vertical factor.
Well, actually, it doesn't really make any difference what her BMI is. The fact that the general point that was being made was that this was a significant weight, which was actually more solidly brought up by the fact of how much we had to weigh, how much we had to lift using the scale when we actually did the models.
Okay.
So there wasn't a direct relationship of BMI going into any of the studies or the tools that we used.
Sure, well, there is in terms of the vertical factor, because the taller you are, the harder it is to pull you out. And if you're shorter, that will affect your vertical factor. And if you're shorter, that will affect your BMI.
The vertical factor is how far you have to lift them out, but the real critical part is how much force do you have to exert to lift them out.
Okay.
So, I mean, BMI is just a general thing that puts it into some sort of perspective, but.
Right, and you used BMI because you wanted to be able to say that this is a pretty heavy person we're lifting out of the tub, correct?
Right.
It's not?
No, yeah. No,
Okay.
that's-
And you had a BMI of 29.4, correct?
Mhm.
I'll write that right here. Do you know the formula for converting BMI? Converting to BMI? Safe to say that BMI can be calculated by taking the weight in kilograms, dividing that. I'm going to use that for division. Would you come down here?
Oh, sure.
I hate to talk to you this way. Nice boots, by the way. I like
Thank you.
those. Okay, so weight divided by the height in meters squared, and the height is squared, correct? Does this equal BMI?
I'm not sure.
You don't remember?
No.
Okay.
It's not something I use. I calculate very often, and I look it up when I need to calculate.
Okay. So I want to do this math with you because this is the number you computed, correct? Okay. I have here, or no, I brought it down here, a copy of Michelle MacNeill's autopsy, okay?
Okay.
What is her height according to this autopsy?
172 centimeters.
And in meters, what is that?
1.72.
1.72, right? And what is her weight in kilograms at the time of the autopsy?
83 kilograms.
So 83, right? Do you have a calculator?
Nope.
You have an iPhone?
No, I left it back there so I didn't have a chance of it going off.
Probably wise.
Counsel, do you need one? I don't know if this will work.
Thank you. So will you square 1.72 for me?
.96.
Do you have another number?
It's actually 2.9584.
9584. Okay. And will you take 83 and divide it by 2.9584?
Okay.
What was that?
28.055705.
28.06?
Yep.
So this is what Michelle MacNeill's BMI was actually, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And you put 29.4.
That was the calculation I made from the information that I had.
What information did you have?
I was given that by Randy.
Do you remember in what form?
Email, I believe.
Was it a copy of the autopsy?
No.
It was something else?
Right.
Okay. Now, are you aware that there's been testimony that when emergency responders came to assist Michelle MacNeill, that they gave her IV fluids, calcium, and all kinds of stuff?
No.
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Overruled, it goes to weight,
Correct.
right? Overruled.
So let's say they worked on her for a couple of hours, or let's just say an hour. They were pumping fluids into her. Let's say, just as an assumption, that there were 2 kilograms of fluid injected into her for emergency services, okay?
Okay.
Before she's taken the autopsy. So I'm going to put 81 here for 81 kilograms. I'm taking out 2 kilograms. This will remain the same, correct? because her height didn't change.
Right.
So I'm going to do 2.9584. Will you do this calculation for me?
Premature. $27.379664.
So if we accept the assumption that she was given 2 kilograms of IV fluid, then her body mass index would actually be 27.37, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you. We can be seated.
Thanks.
And based on the literature, and you've studied a lot of obesity literature, 27.07 for a 50-year-old female is not that significant.
I don't know, I'd have to look at the ranges. There's a range from normal to obese, and then from obese to morbidly obese, but I don't have that
Okay.
right here.
I want to talk to you about this top 7% figure. And I'm trying to figure this out because in your report, you say, according to these calculations, only about 7% of the population would have sufficient torso strength to perform the lift, basically, right?
Yes.
In anywhere in your report, did you say the population is specific to the defendant, or is that's today you've said
That's
that?
today.
Okay, so when you say population, you don't mean every man, woman in the United States. You're talking a population of 51-year-old, 6'2", 206-pound males.
Right.
And again, your conclusion is not that this is impossible, but you think that it's highly unlikely based upon the calculations, some of which we've reviewed today.
Yes.
Okay. Can I have a moment, Your Honor?
May. Have redirect.
Body mass, a variable in your calculations.
No.
Is water on the floor a variable in your calculations?
No. They're not a variable in the calculation. I think I did put in the conclusion that that could make the lift more difficult to do than the calculations would indicate, but
But that's separate from your conclusions from the calculations. Right, okay. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you. Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Do you have questions for this witness? Pass them to the end of the row. Anyone? May he be released from his subpoena?
Yes.
We don't object.
Thank you. You'll be released. You may step down. Thank you. Would you collect materials here? I'm not sure whose they are. Okay. Will you just make sure we're not having exhibits walk out?
Thank you. The defense rests.
Thank you. Does the state intend to call rebuttal witnesses?
We do not, Your Honor.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the presentation of evidence. Tomorrow morning, beginning at 8:30, I will read some final jury instructions to you. We will hear closing argument from counsel, and then the case will be submitted to you for deliberation. Until that time, remember my admonition. It's your duty not to discuss any subject of the trial with anyone, including family or friends that you may see tonight, or with each other. It's your duty not to form or express any opinion about how the case should be decided until it is submitted to you for deliberation. Avoid television, radio, or internet news coverage of the trial. Do no research on your own using computers or something else. I will see you at 8:30 in the morning.